The alarm on the alien cruiser Khor-Vath wasn't triggered by a weapon, not by an invasion, not by an attack. It was triggered by a hungry, frozen man named Thomas Reed putting trash on himself. And 60 minutes later, the entire battle fleet orbiting the Earth froze in complete, absolute silence, because their sensors had just detected something that, according to their own laws of physics, was impossible. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. To understand how an ordinary welder from an abandoned mining town on the outskirts of Alaska scared away an entire armada of creatures that had conquered hundreds of star systems in just 1 hour, you need to go back 3 days, to the moment when the sky above Earth first turned black, not from clouds, but from metal. The invasion began without announcement, without ultimatums, without a single word of warning. A race calling itself the Khor-Vath, chitin-armored warriors who live by the single law of their culture. The weak exist only to be conquered by the strong. Simply descended from the skies and began methodically, mercilessly capturing city after city. The Earth wasn't ready. How could it be ready for something it had never seen before? The major military bases fell first, not because their defenses were weak, but because Khor-Vath technology was head and shoulders above anything humanity could muster. Their ships deflected missiles like raindrops. Their armor withstood direct hits from tank guns as if they were children's toys. More people died in 3 days than in the entire Second World War. And in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this despair, there was one man who had lost everything he had and who was left with nothing but rage. Thomas Reed was a welder in a closed mine, a man whose hands knew metal better than most people know their own faces. He had a wife. He had a daughter named Amber, 7 years old, with pigtails and a laugh that could melt even the hardest heart. On the first night of the invasion, his city was wiped off the face of the Earth by a single flyby of an alien ship, using a weapon that human science couldn't even classify. Thomas's wife died instantly. He managed to save his daughter, pushing her into the basement a second before the impact. She survived, but from that moment on, something went out in Thomas Reed's eyes that couldn't be rekindled in the usual way. There's only one thought left, burning away everything else. They took everything from me, and I'll take from them everything I can. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The day after the city's destruction, Thomas, leading his daughter by the hand through the rubble of what had once been the main street, came across something strange. The wreckage of the alien ship, a small reconnaissance vessel, destroyed by a stray artillery hit before the main Khor-Vath force had established complete air superiority, lay smoking in a crater in the middle of what had once been a city park. The ship's crew was dead. All 3 of them. One of the bodies, judging by the insignia on the chitinous armor, belonged to an officer of fairly high rank. And next to this body, thrown aside by the explosion, lay a set of armor. Not just any armor. A combat-grade exoskeleton. Technology humanity had never even suspected existed, as the Khor-Vath never revealed their full combat power to lesser races. The suit, dented, damaged, with a cracked chest plate, still retained a spark of energy, a tiny, flickering indicator within that, if any alien technician had seen it, would have called partially functional. To an alien technician, this would be nothing more than a dumping ground. Garbage fit only for remelting. For Thomas Reed, a welder who spent 20 years of his life taking apart, repairing, and rebuilding broken cars by hand because he couldn't afford new ones, it was something else. It was a chance. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He dragged the damned kit for 3 kilometers, bending under the weight of metal that weighed more than he did, while his daughter walked beside him, too scared to cry, too exhausted to ask questions. They reached an old mining workshop on the edge of town, the very place where Thomas had spent the last 15 years repairing drilling machines that were long overdue for decommissioning, but there was never enough money for new ones. The workshop had miraculously survived, hidden in a rock crevice, invisible to orbital scanners. Thomas didn't sleep for 3 days. He disassembled the exoskeleton down to the last screw, or rather, down to the last screw-like element in a technology whose design bore no resemblance to human engineering. He didn't understand most of what he saw. The symbols on the interior panels were written in a script no one on Earth had ever encountered. The power source inside the suit glowed a cold blue and, apparently, operated on principles that violated at least 3 laws of thermodynamics known to human science. But there was something Thomas understood perfectly. Mechanics. Movement. The way one part transmits force to another. How a broken chain can be repaired if the right connection point is found. He didn't try to understand the technology as a whole. He did what he'd done his whole life. Find what was broken and fix it, piece by piece, without asking why it worked, just making sure it did. He repaired the cracked chest plate with a simple weld, using an alloy he had smelted from the wreckage of 2 other crashed alien machines found nearby. A metal so strong that normal human technology couldn't even cut it. But Thomas, who had spent years working with materials that couldn't be processed by normal methods, had found a way. He replaced the damaged stabilization system by stealing gyroscopes from the mine's old drilling equipment and manually adapting them. Screw by screw, welding incompatible systems together through the sheer force of stubbornness and desperation of a father who swore to his dead wife that he would not let the world take his daughter away from him too. On the 3rd night, when Amber was already asleep, curled up on the old sofa in the corner of the workshop, the suit finally lit up completely. All the indicators at once, for the first time since the crash. Thomas Reed stood before the reanimated exoskeleton of the alien warrior, and his hands were shaking, not from fatigue. They trembled with the only feeling that was still alive in him. Determination. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, the daughter woke up to see her father dressed in something that made her freeze in fear before she recognized his eyes through the cracked visor of his helmet. "Daddy," she whispered. "It's okay, baby," he said, his voice muffled through the helmet's amplifier. Alien technology, but human at its core. "Daddy's just going to work." "What job?" He dropped to one knee, the exoskeleton's mechanism hissing to compensate for the weight, and looked his daughter straight in the eyes. "One where I take back what they stole from us." He took her to his neighbors, a miraculously surviving family hiding in the basement of an old church, and asked them to look after her. Then he turned around and walked. No, not walked. The exoskeleton allowed him to move at speeds beyond the capabilities of the normal human body, each step covering a distance that would take a normal person 5 seconds to run. He headed for the nearest stronghold, Khor-Vath, a small forward base established on the outskirts of the ruined city to control the area and extract resources from the ruins. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The base's garrison consisted of 12 Khor-Vath warriors, armed with plasma weapons, confident in their absolute superiority over the primitive species, which they had been conquering for 3 days without a single serious loss. Their sensors detected a lone figure approaching from the direction of the ruined city, and the garrison commander, a being named Zurak the Punisher, snorted in disdain as he saw the humanoid silhouette appear on the screen. "Another desperate native with a stick," he told his subordinates. "Don't waste ammunition on him. Take him alive, for fun." 3 warriors came forward, weapons at the ready, but without the necessary seriousness, the way a hunter approaches a wounded rabbit, not a threat. Thomas Reed stopped 50 meters away from them, and for the first time in 3 days, something resonated in his chest, beneath the layer of alien armor, not fear. Something more ancient and simpler. He remembered his wife's face in the last second before the explosion. He remembered his daughter screaming in the basement, not understanding what was happening. And then he rushed into the attack. The 3 Khor-Vath warriors, accustomed to the slow, lumbering, predictable movements of primitive species, were completely unprepared for the figure ahead of them to charge forward at a speed that matched their own battle suits. For it was their own battle suit, simply controlled by a being whose body had never been designed for such power, but whose fury more than made up for it. The first warrior didn't even have time to raise his weapon fully before Thomas's armored fist, enhanced with stolen technology, slammed into his chest plate with enough force to pierce it. The second warrior fired, but the shot missed. Thomas, who had never fought before, who had never had military training, moved not thanks to trained reflexes, but thanks to a pure, animal instinct for survival, and an absolute lack of fear of death, because a man who has lost everything he was afraid of losing no longer fears anything. The third warrior tried to retreat to call for reinforcements, but did not have time to finish a word into the transmitter. 40 seconds after the skirmish had begun, all three of Khor-Vath's leading warriors lay motionless on the ground, and Thomas Reed, breathing heavily inside his alien, creaking armor, turned to the remaining 9 members of the garrison, whose sensors were now finally registering the threat they had completely ignored a moment ago. Xurak the Punisher, watching from the base, felt something unfamiliar for the first time in his long military career. "Alarm! Open fire!" he shouted. "All weapons, immediately! Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk." What happened next lasted 17 minutes, but the Khor-Vath who survived the encounter, and only 2 of the 12 did, remembered those minutes for the rest of their lives as the most terrifying experience they had ever endured. Thomas Reed was not a trained warrior. He didn't know military tactics. He didn't understand most of the capabilities of the suit he wore. But he had something the Khor-Vath didn't. He had a cause worth fighting for, a cause that meant more to him than his own life. He dove into plasma cannon fire. He didn't have to wait long. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Aboard the flagship cruiser Khor-Vath, Admiral Vorg the Indestructible, commander of the entire Earth conquest operation, received a report that forced him to rise from his command chair for the first time in 10 years of service. "Repeat," he said, not trusting his own sensors. "Forward base Gamma 7 has been destroyed, Admiral," the communications officer reported, his voice shaking. "Single target. Humanoid and damaged scout killer class armor. Destroyed the entire garrison in less than 20 minutes. That's impossible. The scout killer armor requires level 3 military training to operate. No primitive race is physically capable of wearing it without special adaptations to their nervous system." "Exactly, Admiral. But the sensors don't lie. The target is also..." The officer hesitated. "Go on." The target was repairing damaged suit components using primitive welding techniques. "Our diagnostic systems have never encountered anything like this. The repair method violates 16 different engineering protocols we considered essential for the functioning of this armor." Admiral Vorg walked over to the main screen, which displayed an image from an orbital satellite, a lone figure standing amid the rubble of a destroyed base, and something in the creature's posture, the way it stood, not trying to hide, not trying to run, but simply waiting, caused something ancient and almost forgotten to stir in the depths of the old warrior's mind. "Fear. Gather the entire fleet for a meeting," he ordered quietly. Immediately. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. An hour after the forward base was destroyed, the entire Khor-Vath fleet, 40 warships strong, with sensors covering every square meter of the Earth's surface, was in a state their own protocols had never envisaged. Complete operational pause. Not a single attack was launched during that hour. Not a single city was captured. All the fleet's resources were focused on analyzing that single incident that occurred on the outskirts of the ruined mining town. Because for a race whose culture was built on an absolute faith in the power of technology and military training as the only measures of superiority, what happened was more than just a military defeat. It was an existential crisis. Their sensors, their analysis, their millennia of experience subjugating weaklings, everything told them what had happened was impossible. A primitive creature with no military training, no access to advanced technology, and no understanding of even the basic principles of the armor it wore shouldn't have been able to use it, much less destroy an entire armed garrison single-handedly. And yet it happened. Admiral Vorg the Invincible, standing before a holographic projection of all the fleet commanders, spoke the words that would determine the subsequent development of the entire military campaign. "We made a mistake. We measured this race by our standards of strength, technology, training, weaponry. But the creature we just saw didn't win because of those factors. It won in spite of them. Something about this species allows them to transcend their own bodies and minds when something they value more than their own lives is at stake." One of the junior commanders, who had not yet lost all his self-confidence, objected. "It was an accident, Admiral. One madman in stolen armor poses no real threat to a fleet of 40 ships. Vorg looked at him with a long, heavy gaze. You don't understand. It's not about this one creature. It's about what happens when there's more than one of these creatures. If one untrained man can destroy an entire garrison of experienced warriors with his bare hands, wearing someone else's broken armor, imagine what will happen when thousands of those same people, who have lost everything they loved, get their hands on the weapons we unwittingly leave for them across the planet after every skirmish. A silence fell over the room that spoke louder than any words. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, back on Earth, news of the destroyed Gamma-7 base spread like wildfire. Not through official communication channels. Most of them had been destroyed in the first days of the invasion, but through the old, time-tested method of human survival, word of mouth, from one desperate person to another. The story of a welder who donned the wreckage of an alien ship and single-handedly defeated an enemy garrison spread throughout the surviving resistance enclaves like a spark falling on dry grass. In basements, bunkers, and secret shelters across the continent, people who yesterday thought they were doomed now began asking themselves the same question. If one man could do it with his bare hands and scraps from a garbage dump, what can we all do together? The engineers who survived the first days of chaos began to organize. The military, scattered and demoralized after the loss of centralized command, began flocking to pockets of resistance upon learning of victory on the outskirts of the ruined city. Scientists hiding in underground laboratories began studying the debris of alien technology scattered across the planet after the first days of fighting, no longer with despair, but with cold, determined hope. Because Thomas Reed, a simple welder from Alaska who lost his wife and almost lost his daughter, has just proven to the entire planet one simple truth that humanity has always known about itself, but forgot in the first hours of panic and despair. Khor-Vath technology was superior, but it was created by beings. And what is created by beings can be understood, disassembled, and, if persistent enough, it can be turned against its creators by other beings, especially those who have nothing left to lose. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Thomas Reed himself, returning to his daughter that same evening, removed the damaged helmet and discovered that Amber was awake, waiting for him at the entrance to the basement of the old church, where she was hiding with a neighboring family. She looked at him, bloody, exhausted, but alive, and didn't ask what he was doing. She simply hugged him as tightly as her small child's arms could hold and whispered, "You're back. I'll always come back, baby," he said, kneeling down and hugging her back, the metal of his armor chilling her skin, but she didn't pull away. "No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you." That night, while Amber slept in his arms, Thomas Reed looked at the stars through a hole in the church's ruined roof and thought of nothing but revenge. Nothing more. He thought about the future, about how now that he had proven, to himself, to his daughter, to the world, that what was broken could be fixed, and the impossible could be accomplished, humanity had a chance. Not because of superior technology, not because of military might, and thanks to that one quality that no alien race that has conquered hundreds of star systems has ever fully understood and could never predict. Human stubbornness in the face of loss, human ingenuity in the face of the impossible, and human love, which makes an ordinary welder capable of what an entire army of trained soldiers cannot, because behind that welder stood a cause stronger than any military training in the world. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. 3 weeks later, as the combined forces of human resistance, inspired by the story of a man who single-handedly stopped an invader advance with his bare hands and salvaged armor, launched the first coordinated counterattack across the planet, Admiral Vorg the Invincible stood on the bridge of his flagship cruiser, watching as the signals from his forward bases across the continent went out one by one. He summoned to his office the only surviving warrior from the Gamma-7 base, the one who had witnessed Thomas Reed's attack with his own eyes and had only managed to survive by fleeing. "Tell me again," the Admiral said quietly. "What did you see in his eyes when he attacked?" The surviving warrior, still bearing the marks of shock from that day, did not answer immediately. "Not rage, Admiral. Not madness, as we initially assumed. I saw determination. The absolute, unwavering determination of a being who had already lost everything he feared to lose, and therefore no longer felt fear. He didn't fight to survive, Admiral. He fought because he had something to live for, and he was willing to do anything to protect it. Vorg was silent for a long time, looking at the holographic map of Earth, dotted with the red dots of fading forward bases. "We came here thinking we were conquering a primitive species," he said finally. "But we were wrong from the start. We weren't facing weakness. We were facing the most dangerous force in the known universe. Creatures who find unbreakable willpower precisely when, by all the laws of logic, they should have broken." He turned to his officers, and for the first time in the campaign, there was something in his voice that none of them had ever heard before from their admiral. Respect mixed with fear. "Rethink your entire conquest strategy," he ordered. "Because if one grief-stricken welder is capable of what we just saw, we have no idea what this entire species, united by a common goal, is capable of." Far below, on a shattered but unbroken planet, Thomas Reed was already leading a group of 23 surviving engineers to the next wreck of an alien ship, spotted by resistance scouts 40 kilometers to the north. Because now he knew what every invader who set foot on this planet would soon have to know. People don't give up when they're broken. People are the last to give up, and even then, they find a way to rise again, from the rubble, from the ashes, from someone else's broken metal, if that's all they have left to fight for those they love. And somewhere out there, among the stars, an entire fleet of beings who had conquered hundreds of worlds, for the first time in their long history of conquests, began to understand one simple truth that humanity had always known about itself. Never leave your trash on people's property. They will find a way to turn it into a weapon that can freeze an entire army. If this story resonates with you, follow HFY Frontier TV, where we tell stories about how humanity is changing the fate of the galaxy.